Greetings! Mantaray79 here, and welcome back to another deck profile video for the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game. In today's video, the deck profile I'm going to be doing one for is V standard formats, Kageros, Dragonic Overlord to cross with Flare Trooper Dumjid. Alrighty then, let's get started. First off, the starting unit. The starting unit of this deck is Grade 0, Lizard Soldier Conroe. The Grade 0, Lizard Soldier Conroe. Like any other starting unit in the V standard format, he features only one skill. When ridden on top of, you get to draw a card, and if you're the second to ride to Grade 1, you get to search your G zone and add a quick shield to your hand. Alright then, next, let's get to the Grade 1 lineup. And now for the Grade 1 lineup. For the Grade 1s of this deck, we have 2 Heat Shot Dragons, 4 Dragon Knight Heat Shots, 4 Flame of Hope Airmos, and 2 Flare Trooper Dumjids. The Grade 1 Heat Shot Dragon, its skills are: the first skill, as a Vanguard, when ridden, you may discard one card from your hand and draw one. And the second skill, as a rear guard, whenever the Grade 3 Vanguard that this Heat Shot Dragon from the rear guard in the back row boosts, restands, your Heat Shot can restand along with it. So for Heat Shot Dragon, he's a support card for Vanguards that restand after attacking, like the Dragonic Overlord series. When called onto the center column, back row, rear guard circle, after your Vanguard that has a restanding ability restands, after being boosted by Heat Shot can also restand along with it, making it possible for him to boost another 8,000 power from the back row for your restanding Vanguard's next attacks. So making Heat Shot a good card to use for your Dragonic Overlord series decks, since it's a very steady power up for your Overlord's attacks. The Grade 1 Dragon Knight Heat Shot, its skills are: the first skill, as a rear guard, when called, you may Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1. If the cost has been paid, you can retire one of your opponent's back row rear guards and draw a card. And the second skill, as a Vanguard, when ridden on top of, you may check the top 5 cards of your deck for a Grade 3. If a Grade 3 was among the cards you checked, add it to your hand. So for Heat Shot, it's a powerful card to have as both a Vanguard and a rear guard. Just by calling him, you can not only retire an opponent's rear guard, but also let you draw a card. And the second skill, just by riding on top of him as your Vanguard, you get to check your deck for a Grade 3, thus making him a very good card to have for either situations, for either weakening your opponent or to strengthen your hand or your chances of getting a specific Grade 3 you wish to ride later on. The Grade 1 Flame of Hope Airmo, a must-have card for the Kagero clan's V standard format decks. For the first skill is, as a rear guard, whenever it boosts an attack, it gets another 3,000 power for until the end of battle. And the second skill, whenever your opponent's rear guard is retired, you may retreat Airmo from your own rear guard. If the cost is paid, you can draw one card and countercharge one. So for Airmo, his first skill, just by boosting from the back row, he can serve as an 11,000 power booster from the back row. And the second skill, his main skill, just by retiring your opponent's rear guard, either by using a skill or attacking it, you can then retreat Airmo from your own rear guard, and then you can not only refund a counter blast, but also restock your hand with more cards, making Airmo a must-have for your Kagero decks, regardless if you focus on retiring opponent's rear guards or not. And then the Grade 1 Flare Trooper Dumjid Sentinel Perfect Guard, one of the main cards to play in this deck. For his skill is, the first skill, as a rear guard, whenever your opponent's Vanguard attacks your Vanguard, you may Soul Blast 1. If the cost has been paid, you may move him from the rear guard to the Guardian Circle. And the second skill, But when placed in the Guardian Circle, you may discard one card. If the cost isn't paid, your opponent's attack is completely blocked. So like any other perfect guard, in the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game, Dumjid features more or less the same skill. Like I mentioned before, just guarding him and discarding a card, block an attack, the standard way of using a perfect guard. But his first skill is the main thing about this card. So he can be used as a rear guard just by calling him and boosting from the back row like usual. But also, if you are willing to pay a Soul Blast of 1, he can be moved from the rear guard to the Guardian Circle and be used as a perfect guard. So for Flare Trooper Dumjid is a pretty good card to have if you like to have lots more rear guards to support your front row attacks with by calling him and boosting from the back row. And then when it's time to enter the guard step of your opponent's turn, you can then, pay the Soul Blast 1 to move him to the Guardian Circle, and thus securing you a perfect guard regardless if you choose to call him or not. So Flare Trooper Dumjid, pretty good card to have in your Kagero decks depending on what kind of build you like to play. So, and with that we just about covered the deck's Grade 1 lineup. Next, let's get on to the Grade 2 lineup. Next, we go to the Grade 2 lineup. For the Grade 2s of this deck, we have 4 Ignorant Dragons, 4 Turret Cannon Dragons, and 4 Wyvern Strike Dacots. The Grade 2 Ignorant Dragon, a must-have for all Dragonic Overlord Lacrosse decks. For you see, his skills are: the first skill, when ridden or called, you can check the top 7 cards of your deck for Dragonic Overlord Lacrosse. If the cross is revealed by this skill, you can add it to your hand. So for this first skill, it's a good way to increase your chances of getting Dragonic Overlord Lacrosse to ride as your Grade 3. And the best part about this first skill is, unlike cards like Lava Flow Dragon, you won't have to pay any cost for adding the Grade 3 to your hand. And then, the second skill of Ignorant Dragon. When your Vanguard attacks, if you have 4 or less cards in your hand, Ignorant gets plus 5,000 power. So Ignorant can also serve as a good front row attacker, especially when you use cards like Dragonic Overlord Lacrosse, whose ability will ensure your hand is treated as 0 at all times, and Dragonic Overlord the End, whose skills will allow you to restand twice and to attack 3 times your Vanguard. Under ideal conditions with current cards, you can make sure your Ignorant serves as a front row 25,000 port attacker. The Grade 2 Turret Cannon Dragon. His skills are: as a Vanguard and a Rear Guard, by counterblasting 1 and returning a normal unit from your drop zone to the bottom of your deck, you can then retire one of your opponent's Grade 2 or below Rear Guards, and after retiring, if you have 4 or less cards in your hand, you can draw 1. So overall, this card is a good Grade 2 to have for your Dragonic Overlord Lacrosse decks, since his cost is returning normal units to the bottom of your deck. So by using this skills cost, you can return Dragonic Overlord the Ends from your drop zone to your deck, thus allowing you to use Dragonic Overlord Lacrosse's skill to add the End to the soul and copies all of his abilities. And then for the retiring skill, as long as you have 4 or less cards in your hand, you can draw 1, which works well with Dragonic Overlord Lacrosse's ability, who as your Vanguard will treat your hand as 0 at all times. So overall, Turret Cannon is a good card for retiring your opponent's rear guards, restocking your deck with Dragonic Overlord the Ends, and for drawing 1 extra card to increase your overall hand size even by a little. The Grade 2 Wyvern Strike Dacot. A great card to use for Dragonic Overlord the End decks and for Dragonic Overlord the Cross decks. For you see, his skill is, as a rear guard, by counterblasting 1 and moving your rear guard Dacot into the soul, you can select 1 Dragonic Overlord the End on your field, either your Vanguard or your rear guard, and it gets a skill. When the End attacks, if your opponent wishes to guard the attack, they must guard with 2 or more cards from their hand. So, overall, the cut will help your Vanguard, the Cross, or the End have more possibly successful attacks, seeing as how the
guard restriction skill of Decade will pressure your opponent into either not being able to guard or to use up more cards in their hand. So overall, the Decade is a great card to have for the cross and the end decks, like I mentioned before. And with that, we've just about covered it for the Grade 2 lineup. Next, let's go to the Grade 3 lineup.
And now for the Grade 3 lineup. For the Grade 3s of this deck, we have 4 Dragonic Overlord, the cross. 3 Dragonic Overlord, the rebirth. And 3 Dragonic Overlord, the ends. The Grade 3 Dragonic Overlord, the cross. The main Grade 3 to run in this deck. Its skills are: the first skill, action, as a Vanguard, once per turn, Soul Blast 1. If the cost has been paid, search your deck for up to 1 card with Overlord in its card name that is different from this unit's. Put it into your soul and shuffle your deck. And this unit gets all of that card's card names and abilities until the end of the turn. The second skill, continuous, as a Vanguard. When your card effect would count the number of cards in your hand, it is regarded as 0. And the third skill, continuous, as a Vanguard. If your opponent's Vanguard is Grade 3 or greater, this unit's drive cannot become 0 or less. So for the cross, his first skill, just by paying a mere Soul Blast of 1, you can choose any Overlord from your deck other than the cross. For example, the rebirth and the end. You can give the cross their names and skills for that turn. Thus, you can more or less use their skills to attack your opponent with, and also to use any support cards that specifically support either the rebirth and the end, and add them onto your Vanguard, the cross. Then the second skill of the cross, whenever your own card effects would count the number of cards in your hand, is regarded as 0. So any skills that require you to have a specific number of cards in your hand, for example, Turret Cannon and the end skills, which require you to have 4 or less cards in hand. With the cross, as second skill, your hand will always be treated as 0. Thus, you can activate your skills without having to discard or waste a unnecessary number of cards in your hand. And the third skill of the cross, if your opponent's Vanguard is Grade 3 or greater, this unit's drive cannot become 0 or less. So, for example, with the end's restanding skills, which require you to reduce your Vanguard's drive check by 1 every time it restands. With the cross skill, at the very least, for the third attack after the second restand, your Vanguard will at least retain 1 drive check after its attack, thus allowing you to have a chance of drawing a trigger or to at least restock your hand ever so slightly. The Grade 3 Dragonic Overlord, the rebirth. Its skills are: the first skill, auto, as a Vanguard. At the beginning of your battle phase, cost, if you have 1 or more rear guards, lock all of your rear guards. If the cost has been paid, then until the end of the turn, at the end of the next battle this unit attacked, it gets a skill, Counter Blast 1, and discard a card from your hand. If the cost has been paid, you may stand this unit. The second skill of the rebirth, auto, as a Vanguard. Whenever this unit attacks a Vanguard, you may Soul Blast 1. If the cost has been paid, then choose 1 of your opponent's rear guards for every 2 of your lock cards and retire it. And then the third skill of the rebirth, auto, as a Vanguard, once per turn. At the end of the battle this unit attacked, if you have 5 or more locked cards and your damage zone has 4 or more cards, cost, discard 2 cards from your hand. If the cost has been paid, you can stand this unit and get an imaginary gift force. So for the rebirth, for his first skill, as long as you don't mind locking all of your rear guards and only being able to attack your Vanguard, you'll be able to give your Vanguard a restanding skill. And the best part about this first restanding skill, it does not reduce any drive checks unlike the end. So for your 2 attacks with Dragonic Overlord, the rebirth, you can check for a total of 4 triggers at possible. Then the second skill of the rebirth, whenever your Vanguard attacks a opponent's Vanguard, and if you're willing to pay the Soul Blast 1 and you have at least 2 or more locked cards, you can retire an opponent's rear guards for every 2 locked cards. So for the second skill, the rebirth also lets you clear out your opponent's field of rear guards to either block off any intercepts or to make their next attack less powerful and less likely to finish you off. And the third skill of the rebirth, auto, as a Vanguard, once per turn. At the battle this unit attacked, if you have 5 or more locked cards and your damage zone of 4 more cards, as long as you don't mind giving up at least 2 cards in your hand, you can not only restand your Vanguard, the rebirth, but also get an imaginary gift force. So So for the Rebirth's third skill, it's also a restanding skill like the first one, except there's some very specific requirements. If you have 5 locked cards in your rear guards and 4 more damage, and you have to pay 2 cards in your hand. But the powerful abilities of the skill more or less make up for the specific requirements and high cost, since not only can your Vanguard restand for another Vanguard attack with 2 drive checks, you also get another imaginary gift force, so you can also add up more power to your Vanguard, making the second or third attack of the Rebirth much more having a better chance of landing a successful hit on your opponent. And now, the grade 3, Dragonic Overlord, the end. Its skills are, the first skill, auto, as a Vanguard. At the end of the battle this unit attacked, activate one of the effects below, but you cannot activate the same effect for the same turn. So for the 2 effects, the first effect, if your hand has 4 or less cards, you may pay the cost of Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1. If the cost has been paid, stand this unit and it gets drive -1 until the end of turn. And the second effect, if your soul has a card with Overlord in its card name, cost, you may discard 3 cards from your hand, then stand this unit and it gets plus 10,000 power and -1 drive until the end of the turn. So for the end, it's more or less a focus on restanding your Vanguard after it attacks the opponent. So for the first effect, as long as you got 4 or less cards in your hand and you don't mind paying a cost of Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1, you can restand your Overlord for another attack despite having a -1 drive. And for the second skill, as long as you've got an Overlord in your Vanguard Soul, as long as you don't mind giving up the hefty cost of 3 cards from your hand, you can restand the Overlord, the end, but not only that, give it more power to make up for the loss of -1 drive. So for Dragonic Overlord, the end, he specializes in attacking your opponent 2 to 3 times as long as you can meet the requirements, since both skills can technically be used as long as you can meet the requirements of having 4 or less cards in hand and having an Overlord in the soul, thus making the end a powerful Vanguard since he can attack the opponent 3 times at almost any situation. And with that, that just about covers the deck's grade 3 lineup. Next, let's get on to the trigger lineup. And now for the trigger lineup. For the triggers of this deck, we have 4 Angry Horn Dragons, 4 Embodiment of Spear, Tars, 2 Demonic Dragon Mage, Rakshasa, 2 Wyvern Guard Berees, and finally 4 Dragon Dancer, Nastashas. The grade 0, Wyvern Guard Beree, Draw Trigger, Sentinel, Perfect Guard. Like any other Perfect Guard in the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game, he features the same skill and activation. When used to guard with, you may discard 1 card from your hand. If the cost has been paid, you may completely block 1 enemy attack. The grade 3, Dragon Dancer Nastasha, Heal Trigger, Heal Guardian. Her skills are, the first skill, when used to guard with, if you have not yet ridden to grade 3, you may activate one of 2 effects. The first effect, you may give your Vanguard plus 10,000 power until the end of the turn. And the second effect, the attacking unit's critical gets -2 until the end of the battle. And then the second skill of Nastasha, when called onto the rearguard circle, if you have no cards in your damage zone, you may place the top card of your deck face up onto your damage zone. So for Nastasha, her first skill is a defensive ability to stop your opponent from rushing you too early in the game. By guarding with her, the first effect gives you plus 10,000 power to the end of the turn. So the first one is to stop your opponent from rushing you early by attacking you many times with many front row units. And the second effect, minus the attacking unit's critical by 2. Just like the first effect, it's a defensive ability to stop your opponent from rushing you early by stopping any high critical attacks from hitting you and building up your damage too early in the game. And the second skill of Nastasha, she's a more or less a countermeasure against the damage denial strategy. The damage denial strategy is when an opponent avoids attacking your Vanguard early on in order to prevent you from having any counterblast to use your skills with. So for Nastasha, just by calling her, you'll be able to secure 1 counterblast, thus stopping the annoyance of the damage denial strategy from preventing you from using your cards or any of your skills. And now with that, that's the trigger line of this deck. For the trigger line of this deck, we play 10 critical triggers, 2 draw triggers, and 4 heal triggers. And now, after having just explained the deck's build and card effects, let's get on to the deck's main playstyle. For the main playstyle of this deck, first we just normally ride from our usual ride line from grade 0, 1, 2, and 3. And for your grade 3, try to at least make sure you ride Dragonic Overlord across every time. And then when it's time to prepare your attacking formation, first off, use Dragonic Overlord across a skill to cross over to either Dragonic Overlord the Rebirth or Dragonic Overlord the End. When deciding which one to cross over to, it more or less depends on what cards you have on hand. So if you wish to use Dragonic Overlord the End, make sure you have at least Heat Shot Dragon and or Wyvern Strut the Cut. If you have one of these or both of these cards ready to use, so you cross over to the end. If not, then simply cross over to Dragonic Overlord the Rebirth and use whatever rear guards you have on hand to meet the requirements to activate the Rebirth skill. Like for example, the Flare Trooper Dumjid. For Flare Trooper Dumjid's skill of being able to perform a perfect guard from the rear guard works well with the Rebirth's requirement to have rear guards to lock with, since with the Rebirth, when you use the skill to lock all your rear guards and attack your opponent with its restatting skills, and then when at the end of the turn when you unlock, you'll have Flare Trooper Dumjid all set up in your rear guard to guard against your opponent during their turn. And yep, so that's pretty much the main playstyle of this deck. So as I mentioned before, first you just simply ride up to grade 3, make sure you have at least, make sure you always ride the cross as your first grade 3, then choose to inherit the names and skills of either the end or the cross. When choosing either the end or the cross, when choosing the end, try to make sure you have at least Heat Shot Dragon and or Wyvern Strut the Cut in your rear guard. And for Rebirth, well, just try to secure a Flare Trooper Dumjid to use his skill later to defend against your opponent on the next turn after you're done using your Rebirth Vanguard to land a bunch of powerful attacks. And with that, we just about covered the deck's main playstyle. And with that, that's just about all the time we have for today. First off, I want to say thank you to the viewers for watching today's video, and to please stay tuned for more videos I plan to upload again in the near future. I also hope you all show support by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing to my videos and channel. And with that, I say goodbye and see you all soon.